past revealed and reviled. Imagine mankind gaining a deeper understanding of his past. Here's an eye-opener for the futurists and authors of science fiction out there. Imagine if, in one day, in the future, technology became available that could see and hear into the past. However, this technology came to be. What would be important would be the fact that mankind, or humanity, could finally see what led to its current state. How had society and civilization been formed? What circumstances and what decisions created that modern society? And were those decisions good or bad, despite whether or not the outcomes were good or bad? Whether that state of the current civilization and or society be good or bad, what would arguably be most important would be how that society and or civilization came to be. In other words, did the means justify the end? For as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And one of the types of roads that should probably be scrutinized closely would have to be any road intersecting with the proverbial road to the underworld. This, I imagine, would be especially so for any road upon which domination over another people was the means. An example of such a road or roads would be any that led to war. An analysis of the actions and rationale behind said actions could provide greater insight into the psyches of those in power at that time. One USC that such an analysis would provide what to be to compare the will of the masses as opposed to the will of their leaders. In essence, did these leaders act in accordance with what those they led determined as their best interest? If through this analysis it was proven that these leaders did not act faithfully and in accordance with the will of their people, then perhaps more scrutiny would be necessary moving forward. Perhaps the people, or the masses, or the public would not simply rely on their leaders to do the right thing, but they would also scrutinize their leaders' actions and force those leaders to do their bidding as opposed to doing the bidding of those who benefit most from war. While there may have been good intentions behind those wars, they may not have justified the end result. Those who died, or those who lost family members to such wars, might not have seen any justification in those wars. Just look at what Hitler and the Nazis did. They sought to return Germany to a former glory that did not see the German people subjugated to the rest of the world, an outcome of World War I. Hitler looked at what Germany was going through after World War I and realized that something needed to change. The way in which he sought out that change was neither justified nor moral, but that man thought he was doing the right thing. In the end, however, history taught us that he was wrong, his actions were wrong, and the people who followed him were not only misled and propagandized, but too willing to ignore what was right and what was wrong. As for the actions of the Nazis, most believe that they were not beneficial to anyone involved. But what about the things that came about after the Second World War ended? In 1948, England gave the Jewish people a home. The land upon which this home would be settled was in the Middle East. The land appeared to have already had occupants upon it. From what we know, the Jewish refugees settled in that land and took over the homes from the people who already resided on that land. There is a name for what the Jewish people did to take over those homes. It was called the Nakba. It was basically a time when those living in the new land that the Jewish people would call home were told to either leave peacefully and of their own accord or be moved out. The way in which those people were moved out was through violence. In one city, a city called Tantura, the people were massacred. There are interviews of the Jewish soldiers at the time gleefully talking about how they raped the women and murdered the people by gunning them down or chasing them with flamethrowers to burn them alive. Years later, mass graves would confirm what the Jewish people did in that city. While not a reflection on Jewish people in home, the fact that this behavior was never condemned openly nor avoided decades later did say something about those who survived the Holocaust that occurred during World War II. Just imagine if it had been the opposite, where the Jewish people had land that was given to another group of people who forced the Jewish people out of their homes. I do not think that this action would be looked kindly upon by the rest of the world. But what we are here to discuss now is if there were a technology that could look back at these events clearly and see what actually happened, especially. Let's say someone invents a machine that could capture light and sound from the past. I imagine it would be audio that would first be captured, as its speed would be more easily overcome than the speed of light. So initially, we would be able to listen in on the past. Let's say we design a probe that could travel at 1,000 times the speed of sound. And that probe contained a device that was so sensitive it could pick up all sounds emitted in its direction. So let's say that this probe is launched towards Alpha Centauri. It passes all audio that ever existed for 1,000 years, or however many times the speed of sound it travels. The probe then turns and focuses back on Earth. It then captures all of the audio that came from Earth and went towards Alpha Centauri. If this probe could only capture as far back as 10 decades, let's say 100 years, it would still prove useful in exposing the truth. This probe would pick up all transmissions from Hitler, the Allies, and the Axis. This would prove much more useful than all documentaries created from recorded devices that were earthbound. And then, if there was a technology that could somehow surpass the speed of light, let's say wormhole technology, where we could get a probe to go so far away that once it turned and aimed its sensors back at Earth, it could pick up all the light that Earth has inadvertently sent out to the universe for decades or centuries. There was an episode of The Twilight Zone, or in Outer Limits, where aliens had been watching transmissions from TV shows originating on Earth. And because of the videos they watched that originated from Earth, they thought that this was the way Earthlings lived and interacted with one another. In that episode, the aliens had been watching a sitcom and had therefore been misinformed as to how humans interacted with one another. In my scenario, instead of aliens looking back at humanity's past, it would be humans looking back at their own history to discern what was true from what they were told to be true. What could we divine from such technology? What would Americans discover about their past and the past created by their leaders? Would the actions of those who had been elected to lead them be considered just or moral or even legal? Would most Americans even recognize the truth as compared to what they were told by their leaders? While it is understandable to have secrets and classified information, I do not think that the secrets our leadership has held over the past few decades would be justified. I do not think that what our leaders have done over the past few decades benefited most. I think what this probe would show would be that most of America's leaders were beholden to a minority that held the most wealth, not the majority. In 2025, it is difficult to say otherwise as more and more people lose their wealth. In a time when fewer people can afford such things as houses, cars, food, water, and more in a nation which is arguably the richest nation to ever exist on planet Earth, it's hard to justify the inequity. If only the majority realized it held more power than the elite, and utilized that power to end the unjust, immoral, and ultimately unsustainable control that they abuse for their own selfish ends. Before a problem can be solved, it must first be recognized. Americans need to realize that they are failing to recognize their biggest problems. For no matter their race or ethnicity, most of them are finding it more difficult to survive. The cost of everything except wages continues to go up, as does the debt required to pay for those things needed for survival. Americans need to wake up and realize that it's not their political party affiliation that stands in the way of a prosperous future for them and their offspring and other loved ones. Both Democratic and Republican voters are seeing more bills that only benefit the wealthy being passed into law. What bills have come out of Washington, D.C. that seek to curb or halt the rising cost of housing? Why are corporations allowed to continually outbid prospective human home buyers with cash? Why is it that America, the most militaristic, aggressive, antagonistic, and malevolent nation on Earth can spend trillions on wars, but not take care of the veterans that live on the street. Just look at the charities that have popped up requesting donations to help veterans find housing and treatment for their wounds, whether they be mental, physical, or emotional. Wounded Warriors and Tunnel to Towers are a couple that come to mind. Our leaders created these veterans. They should take care of them, especially when they have sacrificed so much. It was not unions that weakened the power held by America's labor force. For, though they have suffered from inept, inefficient, and sometimes corrupt leadership, unions made us stronger by uniting us in our efforts to make life better for a majority of workers, as opposed to the minority in management. Americans need to realize that most of us face a common foe, an enemy from within that has seen to the destruction of all systems and institutions that have sought to even the playing field for us all. As a favor to me, look even closer at any issue of which you have paid close attention. I can guarantee that in most, if not all cases, the root of those problems will trace back to large sums of money. Whether that money be used to fight things like unions and veterans' assistance directly, or to propagandize people about political affiliations, or to force the citizens of a nation to take an experimental vaccine that even the inventor denounced. All roads lead to money.